In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. I just finished page 14, the box on page 14. I am going to explain the things that are inside page 14 and 15 and maybe other pages which continue, okay, which follow this page. Well, on page 14 we have something like line 1 below the box. It says that the A language approach includes not only theories that emphasize physical manifestations of language, but also those that treat language as a social phenomenon. Okay, so it talks about A language. Okay, so as a collection or system of actions or behaviors of some sort, these are approaches, e-language, okay? And if you actually go to 2 lines to the bottom of this, in fact, paragraph, 2 lines to the bottom of this paragraph, which it says, much work within the fields of sociolinguistics and discourse analysis comes within the e-language approach. So if you are doing e-language approach, you are maybe it actually includes sociolinguistics and it includes, as you see, discourse analysis. Why? In sociolinguistics, they don't look at inside the mind. They go outside. They go to the society and look at the sentences that people actually say outside the mind. Sociolinguistics is an e-language approach, number 1. Well, discourse analysis. What do? We actually take a text, a paragraph, okay? And say it is something that is said. Let us analyze it. So discourse analysis analyzes an e-language approach. It's a kind of approach which is an e-language approach. These are the 2 examples of e-language approaches. If you want to actually say other things in addition to the box above, on page 14, you see that e-language approaches actually includes other properties in addition to the ones that we have there. So e-language approach includes sociolinguistics. E-language approach includes discourse analysis. Okay, so this is important. Well, at the next paragraph, it says an I language is whatever is in the speaker's mind. Repetition. It is already, you know it. Namely, a computational procedure and a lexical. This is important. Well, when we look at Chomsky's approaches, we look at 2 things at the same time. A computational procedure which takes care of the grammar of English, a grammar of Arabic, the grammar of a language. Okay, the computational, in fact, system includes the things that we said before Nowruz. Okay, before Nowruz. Okay, I told you that the computational system doesn't mean the computer; it means the grammar. Okay, so it's a combination of the grammar, the structure of a language like English, and the lexicon. What is a lexicon? Vocabulary. So for Chomsky, there are 2 things that are the main concerns of language. One is the grammar, the syntax, the computational system, and the other is number 2. Okay, number 2 is something like this, that we have a lexicon. What is a lexicon? Lexicon is vocabulary. So we see that Chomsky takes care of not only grammar, but also the vocabulary. So, for example, let's call this kind of thing here. Can you see? This is the wall, or the jidar. Okay? Why do we call it the jidar or wall? Because it's going the vocabulary. The vocabulary includes something like the wall. It includes like something like this kind of thing. Let us say Well, they called it as the watch. They call it as the watch. This is a vocabulary. Chomsky says that in addition to grammar, you have to, in fact, include not only the grammar, but also the vocabulary. It's easy for you. It's not so difficult for you to understand. But let's go to the last paragraph. This is important. I'm going to read it for you. Let us see what is this. Well, the opposition between these two approaches in linguistics has been long and acrimonious. What is it? The book says that, well, there are two approaches. Which one is right? What is your idea? Elanguage or ilanguage? Well, my answer and the book's answer is something so difficult. We cannot say that, well, one approach is good and another approach is bad. Maybe one approach is good for one purpose and another approach is good for another purpose. So, are you Chomskyan? We say, no, I want to study both Chomskyan and non-Chomskyan. Are you following one thing or the other? We say, well, I look to see whether this is good for my, in fact, approach of teaching or not. So I'm not going to say one thing is good, the other is not so good. Okay, well, let us see what appears here. Line 1, as I told you, says, the opposition between these two approaches in linguistics has been long and acrimonious. It's a long time. They say, one says that e-language is the best. The other says that I-language is the best. The book says, well, these are long debates and acrimonious. Well, they say they are, well, if you are an e-language approach, you say that an I-language approach is an enemy of me. No, you're not going to say something like this. But the approach is like this. That these two approaches are acrimonious, the enemies of each other. Okay, the enemies of each other. Sometimes they say Chomskyan, non-Chomskyan. Sometimes they say, well, discourse analysis is best. Sometimes they say, no, Chomskyan approach is best. Well, let us see. I will give you examples in order for you to understand that we need both approaches. Are you, in fact, an advocate of Kuratul Qadam? The same thing appears there. In Iran, we have the same thing. There are two types of colors in Iran. The blue color and the red color. Okay, maybe it is something that a majority of people actually in Iran are, in fact, red. Persepolis. Kuratul Qadam. The club Persepolis in Iran. And a good number of people actually in Iran are blue, the blue ones. Okay? Istiqlal. Of course, this is after the revolution name for, in fact, Taj. The name actually before revolution it was Taj, which is the crown of a king. Okay? Taj. Okay? So people in Iran used to be of two colors and are still continue to be of two colors. Red, blue. Okay? So, which one is better? You know that each time one club does better than the other. One club wins while the other club loses. Okay? When there's a competition. Okay? So, are we going to be like Istiqlal and Persepolis in Iran? let's say, blue and red? No. Maybe you are following European, in fact, soccer games, European soccer games, European football games, like, let's say, Europeans, Spanish ones in Iran. Actually, Spanish ones are actually very popular in Iran, and other, in fact, clubs are important in Iran, and in fact, in the Iranian television, you actually see these types of things. I don't know where you follow these lines or not. But the point is that we are not going to be like this in our science. In our science, we say both approaches are welcome. It is exactly like your methodology. You never say that grammar translation is the worst, or maybe you don't say that you don't need audio lingualism at all. You say that we take important things from all, in fact, approaches and methods. The same appears here in fact, linguistics. So sometimes we are I-language approaches. We are following an I-language approach. Sometimes A-language approach. What is the approach in this book? An I-language approach, Chomskyan approach. Okay, well, if you actually go to this paragraph on page, the last paragraph on page 14, you continue, we see that we have the same types of approaches in other fields of study. Okay? For example, well, in literature, line 3, we have the difference between romantics and classicists. Romanticists and classicists. Okay? Romanticism and classicism in literature. Which one is good? We say both are good. Both are good. Which one do you follow? Maybe you are in fact classicist. Maybe you are, let's say, romanticist. Okay? Both are right. Both are right. Both are great. Both are, in fact, good. In fact, classes of, in fact, schools of literature. I will give you a third example. In addition to the soccer films in Iran, soccer, in fact, clubs in Iran, in addition to the literature, let us go to psychology and personality. Okay? Psychology. Okay? Well, we say there are two types of people. Maybe you are an introvert. Maybe you are an extrovert. Maybe you're a combination of an introvert and extrovert in psychology. Okay? It's good. So we are not going to say introverts are best or extroverts are best. We say both approaches are good. And even in physics, we have the same approaches. Maybe there are other examples on the physics, let's say, traditional physics, modern physics, classics, modern physics, and classical physics. Okay, it's like this. So it is like this. Okay, I am already done with this page. Let me go to my book because you don't have the picture here. I'm going to, in fact, go to my book actually to see what is out there on page 15. Well, it's good for you to go to page 15, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Line 6, page 15, line 6. The linguist despises the I linguist for not looking at real facts. Again, continuations of the acrimonious notions, okay, that we had at the end of the page 14, okay? Okay. And the I linguist derides the e-language for looking at the trivia, the things that are not so important. So each one is going to say that, no, you are to blame. And that kind of thing is, it says that you are to blame, like this. E-language approaches say that I-language approaches are not actually doing linguistics, and vice versa. Okay, so it's like this. The I-language versus E-language distinction, as appears on the last sentences of this paragraph, is something like this. Is as much a difference of research methods and of admissible evidence as it is of long-term goals. Okay, yes, this is like that. The next paragraph is something like that. The influential distinction between competence and performance, first drawn in Chomsky, 1965, partly corresponds to I-language and E-language split. What does it mean? Remember, we just talked about E-language and I-language. We already talked about competence and performance. Competence is your ability to use language. You have got the ability to use language. Performance is the actual saying, performing of sentences, or listening to the sentences. Performance is like this. I told you earlier. So the distinction between competence and performance by Chomsky is something like this. Chomsky says that competence is good. Okay? Chomsky says competence is good. Non-Chomskyan approaches say no, performance is good. Okay? So remember, if you are going to, in fact, work with these types of things, we have to understand that which approach we are following, and according to the approach, we are going to, in fact, follow competence and performance. Okay? Let us see. So, for I-language approaches, competence is good. For E-language approaches, performance is good. I will give you examples of the two just now. Well, competence says something like this. Competence says something like this. Well, whether you are sleeping or not, you have got the ability to talk in a language. It is part of your competence inside your mind. Suppose you go to a doctor, and because of that you go under surgery. Go under surgery, medical operation. So they put you on a sort of sleeping in order to, in fact, cut part of your body. Okay, in order to, in fact, remove something bad from your body. Okay, so you make you sleep. Okay, make you sleep like this. So when you wake up after the hospital, you have got the knowledge. Okay? This is your competence. The competence remains constant. If you know English, you know it for all your life. This is knowledge. Competence is your knowledge. What is performance? Performance is the actual performance. I am actually performing English in the form of producing sentences at this time. If I am actually tired, I cannot produce sentences. Good sentences, of course. So performance is, in fact, if you are tired, your performance is bad. Okay, if you are actually after the surgery, you are going to sleep and come up and sleep and come up. At that time, you are unable to talk. Your performance is so poor. Okay? Okay? So this is performance. Performance. Are you performing something? Yes. You are listening to Professor Piruz at the time being. You are listening to Piruz now. At the time being, you are listening to Professor Piruz. So what does it mean? It means that you're performing. This is the act of your performance. Okay? So there are two types of performance. When you talk, you're performing. When you listen, again, you're performing. Okay? But when you're asleep, no performance. The question is, when you're sleeping, there is no performance. There is no competence as well? No, we say the competence remains constant, whether you are asleep, whether you are tired, whether you have got fatigue or not. Okay, so what Chomsky says? Chomsky says that I am working with performance. Excuse me, I'm working with competence. Well, when you work in fact, with your students, you actually work with their performance because you don't know what is out there in the minds. So you are working with the performance. Language teachers all actually work with the performance of the students. Okay? So this is the difference between performance and competence. So language teachers are actually working with elanguage more than ilanguage, and Chomsky approaches actually only work on in ilanguage approaches. Okay, so this is what appears on page 15, paragraph 2. Okay, paragraph on page 15, actually, we have something like the definition of competence and performance on page 15, paragraph. In fact, the new paragraph after the second new paragraph. It means somewhere in the middle of the paragraph, in the middle of the page. Okay, beginning with, let us start with Chomsky's definition of competence. Okay, you are going to, in fact, continue with this distinction. Well, let us go to the next paragraph and finally go to the last two lines of, in fact, page 15. The last two lines. I'm going to read this part for you. The Chomsky's notion of competence has sometimes been attacked for failing to deal with how language is used, performance, and the concept of communicative competence has been proposed to remedy this lack. Hyams, 1972. So, Chomsky first says, competence is the best and performance is not my job. Others come to say, well, let us introduce something else as well, and this is very good. Hyams introduces communicative competence. And actually, language speakers are, in fact, fascinated with this communicative competence. Why? Because it includes not only Chomsky competence, but it includes some other competences as well. Like what? So when we say communicative competence, it includes the three types of competences that Chomsky only looks at only one. Grammatical competence, sociolinguistic competence, number 2, and number 3, strategic competence. Okay, these are put into one thing called communicative competence, which includes these three things. If you have got questions about communicative competence, go and ask your questions about the difference between communicative competence and competence without anything. So competence and communicative competence. If you have got questions about competence and communicative competence, I will give you and I will help you with the distinction. So I stopped on page, somewhere on page 16, which includes pragmatic competence. When we talk about, in fact, communicative competence, it includes pragmatic competence as well, which appears on page 16. Well, I'm going to finish the discussions just now, somewhere about page 16 and 17. And already I am done up to page 19, but I'm going to have a short review next time on page 16, 17, 18 and 19 for you, in order for you to understand better what we mean by in fact Chomsky's universal grammar. Thank you very much. I'll stop here and I'm going to continue with the discussions later on. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening to me.